In nearly 8 years at Twitter, I worked in and led a division called Trust and Safety. Trust and Safety's core duty is content moderation, removing tweets that violate Twitter's terms of service and suspending users who repeatedly break the rules. This work is sometimes dismissed merely as censorship, but it represents a key way that Twitter and other companies live up to their responsibility to keep the users of their products safe. Much of this work is uncontroversial. For example, taking down accounts that engage in child sexual exploitation or promote terrorism. The gray area of this work, though, is when trust and safety teams have to make decisions about so-called lawful but awful material, content that may be legal in many jurisdictions, but isn't something most people would want to experience. Think of things like posting someone else's home address without their permission, or bullying somebody for a disability or for how they look. A free speech absolutist might say, yes, that kind of content is unpleasant, but it's not against the law. What right do you have to remove it? The answer is the need to make Twitter an appealing product for millions of people. Consistently, in its own research, Twitter found that users were unhappy with the company's approach to content moderation, and that this dissatisfaction drove people away from the service. This has consequences for what we mean by free speech on social media. Again and again, we saw the speech of a small number of abusive users drive away countless others. Unrestricted free speech, paradoxically, results in less speech, not more. And it was our job in Trust and Safety to try to strike an appropriate balance. But the importance of this work goes far beyond Twitter's business prospects and into the realm of national security. In 2017, I led the team at Twitter that uncovered significant interference in an American election by agents of the Russian government. Their mission was to stoke culture war issues on social media to try to further divide Americans. My team and I exposed hundreds of thousands of these accounts from Russia, but also from Iran, China, and beyond. It's a concern with these foreign interference campaigns that informed Twitter's approach to the Hunter Biden laptop story. In 2020, Twitter noticed activity related to the laptop that, at first glance, bore a lot of similarities to the 2016 Russian hack and leak operation targeting the DNC. And we had to decide what to do. And in that moment, with limited information, Twitter made a mistake. Under the distribution of hacked material policy, the company decided to prevent links to the New York Post stories about the laptop from being shared across the service. I've been clear that in my judgment at the time, Twitter should not have taken action to block the New York Post's reporting. And just 24 hours after doing so, the company acknowledged its error. But the decisions here aren't straightforward, and hindsight is 2020. It isn't obvious what the right response is to a suspected but not confirmed cyber attack by another government on a presidential election. I believe Twitter erred in this case because we wanted to avoid repeating the mistakes of 2016. And so the basic job of Trust and Safety is to try to strike this balance between the harms of restricting too much speech and the dangers of doing too little. I'll be the first to admit that we didn't always get it right. Even rare mistakes add up when you're carrying out content moderation at the scale of hundreds of millions of unique posts per day. While I was head of Trust and Safety at Twitter, I strove to do this work with impartiality and with a commitment to the fair enforcement of Twitter's written rules. But whether it's me or Elon Musk or someone else in the future, someone will have to make choices about the governance of online spaces. Those decisions should not be made behind closed doors or based on personal whims. I hope that we can work together to find ways to bring greater trust and transparency to social media, and I look forward to answering the committee's questions about any of these topics to the best of my ability.
Thank you. Ms. Navaroli.
Good morning, Chairman Comer, Ranking Member Raskin, and members of the committee. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you all today. I'm here because there is an urgent need for us to understand the impact that social media companies are having on our democracy. I will be very clear. I was not involved in the decision around Hunter Biden's laptop, but I was involved in decisions that were made leading up to, during, and after the January 6th attack on the Capitol. If we are going to talk about social media in the government, we need to talk about Twitter's failure to act before January 6th. I am here to tell you that doing nothing is not an option. If we continue to do nothing, violence is going to happen again. My background is as a trained lawyer and journalist, and my expertise over the past decade has been in the areas of media, technology, law, and policy, with a particular focus on social media and free expression. I joined Twitter in 2019, and by 2020, I was the most senior expert on Twitter's US safety policy team. My team's mission was to protect free speech and public safety by writing and enforcing content moderation policies around the world. These policies included things like abuse, harassment, hate speech, violence, and privacy. So if no other algorithm or no other human could decide if a tweet violated my team's policies, the safety team policy acted as the final moderators. If a high-profile individual like any member of this committee or President Trump tweeted something controversial, it was sent to my team's desk. Every day, we had to decide whether a particular piece of content equated to yelling fire in a crowded theater. My work at Twitter and subsequently at Twitch put me in the middle of key events in history. What I've learned from them is that social media played and continues to play a role in these events. And 2 years after January 6th, we still need to better understand the role that Twitter played in order to prevent it from happening again. So what do we need to understand? First, Twitter's leadership bent and broke their own rules in order to protect some of the most dangerous speech on the platform. I'm going to talk a little bit about what happened in the months leading up to January 6th. During this time, my team worked to try to minimize the threat of violence that we saw coming. After President Trump instructed the Proud Boys to stand back and stand by in a debate, we considered the danger that that statement would have if it was tweeted. So we crafted what we called a coded incitement to violence policy to address dog whistles like this. Instead of approving it, management bent over backwards to find ways to not approve it. On January 5th, when the policy was still not approved, I led a meeting where one of my colleagues asked management whether someone was going to have to get shot before we were allowed to take down tweets. Another colleague looked up live tweets and read them to management to try to convince them of the seriousness of the issue. Still, no action was taken. On the morning of January 6th, I sent Twitter lawyers a message warning them that our team was hamstrung by leadership. 2 days later, when it looked like it was going to happen all over again, I asked management whether they wanted more blood on their hands. Only then did they act. The second problem is that there is way too much power concentrated in the hands of too few. With January 6th and many other decisions, content moderators like me did the very best that we could. But far too often, there are far too few of us, and we are being asked to do the impossible. For example, in January 2020, after the U.S. assassinated an Iranian general and the U.S. president decided to justify it on Twitter, management literally instructed me and my team to make sure that World War III did not start on the platform. No person, people, or company should have that kind of unchecked power or that kind of responsibility. The modern-day public conversation should not be susceptible to the whims of any one individual or any one company. Fixing the systemic issues that lead to bad decisions is not going to be easy, but people like me who have been in the trenches can help lead the way. But I must say, coming forward and offering this information is risky and it is difficult. Doxing and harassment are real, and people are afraid to tell what they know. So we need to make sure that there are protections for those who speak the truth. We need to create space to hear from people on the front lines. We need to give them protection so they can share their experiences. Only then can we begin to understand the full scope of the problem and to find solutions. There is far too much at stake for us to do nothing. Thank you.
Thank you all. Excellent opening statements. Now we'll begin with the question portion. We'll begin by recognizing Mr. Biggs for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Roth, Within just mere minutes or hours after the New York Post published its story on the Hunter Biden laptop, at 8:51 a.m., you sent a message to a team, part of your team, I assume, and you said, "It isn't clearly violative of our hacked materials policy," referring to the story, "nor is it clearly in violation of anything else." Do you remember sending that message?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. I don't recall that message specifically, but that does sound like my judgment on that day, yes.
Okay, so that was early on in the day, and yet shortly thereafter, Kayleigh McEnany, White House press secretary's, her account was locked. So an inquiry was made the next day by a person named Carolyn Strom. You know Carolyn Strom?
Yes, sir, I do.
Yeah, and Carolyn Strom asked what's going on here, and somebody named Elaine Ong Soto said the user was bounced by site integrity for violating our hacked materials policy. Do you remember that incident?
Yes, sir, I do.
And somebody named Trenton Kennedy said, "I'm struggling to understand the policy basis for marking this as unsafe." And I think the best explainability argument, now that may be a technical term for you, but for me it looks like we're trying to create a narrative here to cover our butt. The best explainability argument for this externally will be that we're waiting to understand if this story is the result of hacked materials. Do you remember Mr. Kennedy's communication?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. And so then we get into a whole series of things written by Mr. Baker going back and forth. And he says on that same day, now at 9:26, which is about a half an hour after your statement that you don't think that anything's been violated here, he says, "I've seen some reliable cybersecurity folks question the authenticity of the emails in another way." And then you seem to later, but by the way, that's almost inconceivable. I mean, it just seems inconceivable that would have happened so quickly that he would have that. And then you sent out something right after that said, "The key factor informing our approach is consensus from experts monitoring election security and disinformation that this looks a lot like a hack and leak that learned from the 2016 WikiLeaks approach." I'm wondering if you can name for me today any of the experts that seem to have a consensus at 10:12 a.m. on the morning of October 14th that you put out saying that we're going to rely on some group of experts. Who were they?
Thank you for the question. Twitter did not give me access to any of my documents or emails to prepare for this hearing, and so unfortunately I can't give you a direct answer.
Were there, Mr. Roth, were there experts? Were there people that you consulted that were cybersecurity experts between 9 a.m. and 10:15 a.m. on that day?
My recollection is that we were following discussions about this incident as they unfolded on Twitter. So cybersecurity experts were tweeting about this incident and sharing their perspectives, and that informed some of Twitter's judgment here. But I want to emphasize, as I said in my statement, I didn't think that the evidence or those perspectives warranted removal, and I advocated against taking that action.
I understand. Let's look at one other document. Our teams made the determination that the materials fall under our hacked materials policy. It's my understanding from reports and internal sources that normally a hacked material policy would require a government official or law enforcement determination that there had actually been a hacked account before that hacked policy were to be imposed. Is that accurate?
No, sir, it's not.
So the policy did not require that there be any kind of official finding by a government source?
No, there were a number of different types of evidence that we considered under the policy. Certainly government attribution would be a powerful one, but we also looked.
So you weren't looking, that wasn't determinative is what we're saying?
In that instance, we did not have any specific information from any government source, no.
I'm going to read something that applies to this and several other things from the Twitter stack that you guys had. This might be an unpopular opinion, but one-off ad hoc decisions like this that don't appear rooted in policy are, in my humble opinion, a slippery slope and reflect an alternatively equally dictatorial problem. Quite frankly, that's what the essence of all four of your testimony. I realize you're trying to fight against it, but you exercised. You exercised an amazing amount of clout and power over the entire American electorate by even holding them hostage for 24 hours, reversing your policy, and then they're like, well, we want to go back to the originals. That's 24 hours, or 2 weeks, that you imposed your will on the American electorate. I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's time's expired. He went 30 seconds over. I'll give the ranking member an extra 30 seconds.
You're very fair-minded, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ross, let me start with you. Did I hear you correctly to say that there were thousands or even hundreds of thousands of counterfeit Twitter accounts set up by Russian propaganda and disinformation for Vladimir Putin to pump his poison into the bloodstream of American social media? Is that right?
That's right, sir. And that's not just past tense. Those accounts are active on social media today. This is an ongoing campaign.
Well, we should be having a hearing about that. I appreciate your alerting to us what's taken place. Ms. Navaroli, so you've testified that in the months leading up to the November 2020 election and then in the weeks before January 6th, you were growing increasingly anxious about the violent rhetoric and incitement that you saw posted on Twitter. Can you describe specifically what made you so concerned during that period? And did you raise your concerns with people at Twitter?
Thank you for that question. As I said in my opening statement, after former President Trump in his debate said the statement, stand back, stand by to the Proud Boys, my team, in discussion with other teams at Twitter, realized that we had a gap in our policies and that that could not be said on the platform because it would have gone too far. What we did see continue to happen was those statements, in addition to other coded incitement to violence or dog whistles, began to spring up on the platform. And so what was once fringe ideology or fringe statements that were calling for the overthrow of the government became a loud roar. And so we heard individuals beginning to say that they were locked and loaded, that they were ready for Civil War Part 2, that they were ready for another revolution, that they were ready for the day of the rope, in very clear English on Twitter.
And on the January 6th committee, we have tens